Okay, so after a Keystone Cops comedy of errors, um, we'll get this started, and I suspect many of you will have to watch this as a recording, but I've been calling this the Beanpot Webinar series by the Boston branch of the Anthroposophical Society. And so I welcome you all to our latest offering. Back on the 3rd of December, we had Alice as our guest speaker for our monthly branch meeting. This is not the monthly branch meeting. It was so well received, we have invited her back for this special springtime event. That is today's webinar. Before we begin, I wish to remind us all from the Boston group of some upcoming events. In a week, on the 26th, a performance of A Refugee's Tale, which is a theatrical free rendering of Goethe's fairy tale, The Green Snake and the Beautiful Lily. Yes, with Glenn Williamson and Laurie Portocarraro. And that'll be at the Christian Community there in Brookline. And then on May the 6th, we do have our online branch meeting from 7 to 8:15. And we will have Dave Manser speaking about bees. So you don't want to get stung missing that one. And then on the 13th of June, from 2:30 to 3 is the social time, 3 to 4:30 is our annual general meeting at the home of Ken Ingham, Lorraine Circle in Woburn, Mass. This will be an in-person meeting. We will not set up a Zoom for that. Okay, today's topic is art as remedy, and our speaker, Dr. Alice Barton, will use the fabulous works of art by Botticelli for our welcoming of spring. This is, um, well, I should put it this way. The previous talk she did was for Advent in 2025, and that talk was entitled The Seed of David. And a recording of that's available on our website, anthroposophyboston.org. So, Alice, we're delighted to have you with us again. As many of you know, art history is also one of my passions. And like me, Alice had a different career than art history. She got her collegiate studies began with art history as a student at Harvard University. And then she was also studying the works of Rudolf Steiner, that has been for over 50 years. But she ended up getting trained as a physician, then practiced medicine, and finally became a professor of medicine, first at Cornell and then at Brown University. Now she's in retirement, and she has continued teaching embryology as well as art history and biblical studies in Austin, Texas, where she moved to raise her grandchildren. Alice, it's a great delight to have you with us. And so I turn this over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I was realizing since I grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts, that today is Patriots' Day. So I was thinking of myself as a baton twirler with my white boots walking down Massachusetts Avenue. Um, I wanted to mention that I first conceived of this presentation in January, and I chose all the slides in January, and that was before some of the really terrible events of the last few months, before Renee Good and Alex Preddy were shot, before this dreadful war was launched. And there was part of me as it got closer to the time to do this presentation that thought, oh, with so much horror in the world, is there any point to doing some, light, beautiful welcome of springtime? Um, it seemed almost jarringly inappropriate. But then I thought also about what it was like for the anthroposophists during the years of World War I and the importance, I think, for us to stay focused on our work, on our inner work, on our outer work, and there's some kind of echo. I don't know if everybody's muted, Andrew.
Yeah, if
Maybe.
everybody could mute themselves, that would be very helpful.
Thank you. Um, just the importance of truth, beauty, and goodness, all infused with love, that we really need to continue um, doing our best to infuse the world with love during these really dreadful times. So I did decide to go ahead and do this presentation. And I'm going to talk a little bit while you're just looking at the first couple of slides, and then I'll kind of launch more into the content that I wanted to share with you. I just wanted to mention that I thought of this presentation of art as remedy, I think because it felt as if the world was so broken. And I wanted you to think about the word remedy, which comes from two Latin words, re, which means again, but again with a certain amount of force to it, and medere, which means to heal. So healing something again with a certain amount of force is what makes a remedy. So it implies that there was something whole, and then that something was either broken or torn or unbalanced and needed some assistance in achieving a re-healing. So I wanted that to be an image that was in your mind as we begin this journey together. Okay, let me find my little arrow here. So, hmm, I'm going to leave the painting of Botticelli's Primavera you to look at while I do some introductory material on the Neoplatonists. The painting Primavera was painted in about 1478. It's painted with tempera on a panel. You can see it in the Uffizi. It's not fully life-sized. It's about 3 to 4 fifths life size. So it's quite a large painting, and it's actually a difficult painting to capture in a photograph. The painting, just to give you some facts, was commissioned for a country villa in Castello for Lorenzo di Pier Francesco de' Medici, who was a young relation of the great Lorenzo de' Medici of Florence. And Lorenzo di Piero Francesco was surrounded by a group of Neoplatonists, which included Botticelli and others whom I will discuss with you. So who are the Neoplatonists? Obviously, if they're Neoplatonists, there must have been original Platonists. And I want to remind you that the Neoplatonists go all the way back to the mystery streams of Hermes Trismegistus, the streaming together of the ancient mysteries of Egypt and Greece that came to us through the Hermetic writings. That's where the word comes from Hermes Trismegistus and Orpheus. They were then transmitted to Pythagoras and his school, and from Pythagoras to Plato himself, and later from Plato to St. Paul, who wrote the epistles and also inspired the writing of the Gospel of John. And that happened through a character who's very fascinating, Philo of Alexandria, who was a Hellenistic Jew who integrated the Hebrew Bible with the concept of the Platonic intelligible light or the Logos. So Following the biblical times, we start arriving at the Neoplatonists, Plotinus, Porphyry, Proclus, Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, Saint Augustine, and then in the Florentine Neoplatonist school, Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola. So I know that's a lot of names, and some of them may not be familiar to you. I hope you don't mind if I share some information. Um, I don't want this to be too dry, but I think some people like to know the names and when these people lived and what their ideas were, as all of these ideas streamed into the image of the Primavera that you see before her. So I'm going to start with Plotinus, who was the first real Neoplatonist who lived in the 3rd century after Christ and wrote the Aeneads, which are books of nines, mysteries unfolding in nines. And he was very much influenced by the teachings of the ancient Greeks, the Persians, ancient India, ancient Egypt, philosophy and theology. And Plotinus wrote about a supreme and transcendent one which contained no multiplicity and existed beyond the categories of being and non-being. And from this supreme transcendent one, he felt that a nous, which is spelled N-O-U-S, which means soul, a nous would depart from the one and would then later be able to return to that one. So that was the fundamental basis of Neoplatonists, that we started with a transcendent one above being and non-being, and then unfolded into nous, and then further. Porphyry was a student of Plotinus in the 3rd and 4th century AD, and then we move on to Proclus in the 5th century. And he talked about how from the one, the nous or the mind or the soul emanates and contains the knowledge of the united one. And that nous includes in Proclus both the knower, the known, as well as the act of knowing. And I think in our circles, we can appreciate all three of those, the knower, the known, and the act of knowing. And following that level, then there came the actualization, the creation of the sensible world, which was considered to be an imperfect, if beautiful, copy of the nous, or what we could call the Platonic realm of forms. If we move on to Dionysus, Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, who was in the late 5th and 6th centuries, he made it clear that images such as the one we're looking at are not merely metaphorical representations of a higher reality, but are actual steps on a ladder by which the human spirit could ascend and reunite with that original one, the original transcendent being. And Pseudo-Dionysius defended such images as revelations from God himself that include within them occult affinities and harmonies and concordances, where we can see in this microcosm a reflection of the macrocosm. And it was Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite that St. Paul referred to as the Athenian convert of St. Paul that's mentioned in Acts 4, verse 34. And all of these Neoplatonists then inspired St. Augustine, and from there we move on to Marsilio Ficino in the 15th century in Florence. And he is a fascinating individual. He was a priest a teacher, a doctor. He was the first person to translate Plato's complete works into Latin, so they were available for many to study. He also translated Plotinus and Proclus, the Neoplatonists I just spoke about. And he studied the secrets of the Kabbalah as well. So he was um, a great mystic and scholar. In 1484, he wrote one of his most important books, De Amore, which means about love. And it is his work on love as a path to ascend to the spirit that so inspired the circle that Botticelli was included in. In 1489, as a physician, he wrote De Vita Coelitis, which was a medical treatise, which was particularly addressed to young students who were liable to melancholy due to the excessive influence of Saturn. And it was this specific medical treatise that informed the program for Botticelli's Primavera. And the treatise stated that specific influence of the seven planets and the constellations could be drawn down through plants, through scents, through colors, through the metals, that all of these pathways could be drawn down into a specific image that would have a healing influence. The planets, the metals that were associated with the planets, copper with Venus, tin with Jupiter, quicksilver, of course, with Mercury, all of these were embedded in this image as a way for us, or anyone who looks at the image, to be able to, through our inner activity, our active knowing, to reascend to the higher realms and be healed. So this painting was intended specifically as a remedy. I just wanted to mention also that there are several writings, the Picatrix and the Emerald Tablet, among others. These were Persian Asian works of magic talisman that showed how using the elements that are in the world of creation, we can be healed and find our way back into unity with the higher worlds. And Ficino specifically wrote about something he called the mundi figura, which is arrangement of figures with plants and all the things I talked about, which one would contemplate in order to be able to experience those favorable planetary influences. So this Primavera is such a mundi figura with groupings of trees and flowers and the gods that are associated with the planets. So all of this is included in this image. I also want to mention that the image was supposed to be able to have its effects on everyone who looks and is inwardly active, not on just people who know the secrets that were transmitted through the Neoplatonic mysteries, but just through the image itself. And then the small group of individuals who choose to do that inner work of learning and following the occult pathways to the higher worlds have yet another way of living into this image so it can affect us inwardly in a different way from those who simply gaze upon the image. I'm just going to read you a couple quotations from Ficino's De Amore. Beauty is nothing else but the splendor of the supreme good, shining in those things that are perceived by the eyes, ears, and mind. It directs to the supreme good by means of them, sight, hearing, and mind alike. And one other, whenever man casts his eyes into the beauty of the universe and considers it, he sees and loves everywhere a beam of the supreme light and is turned upward to the intuition of its pure essence. I also wanted to speak a bit about Ficino's student, younger student Pico della Mirandola, who was born in 1463. And by the age of 10, he was already an exceptional speaker and poet. And he started to study law at the age of 14. He was able by age 18 to speak and read at least 22 languages. I'm in awe of that, as I can barely learn a bit of Spanish on Duolingo so I can speak with my grandchildren in Bogota. But Pico della Mirandola obviously had this tremendous wisdom and facility. And he wrote a piece called The 900 Theses, which were to compile all the wisdom from the Eastern and the Western cultures in one great work that would synthesize all these hermetic streams that I've been speaking of. He managed to irritate the Pope at that time, Pope Innocent VIII, who who condemned all of Pico's 900 Theses and destroyed all his books. That may remind you of some things. Pico had to seek protection with Lorenzo de' Medici in Florence, and even though he was able to be in the circle around Botticelli, he did not obviously succeed in full protection there, as he died at age 31 in 1494, having been poisoned by arsenic. Pico della Mirandola was particularly important in inspiring the unfolding of the one into the created world by triads. He spent a great deal of time illuminating the importance of the one unfolding in a triad. And I'll talk about the different ways that this is manifest in this painting. And because the Neoplatonists were deeply Christian, they also associated these triads with the Holy Trinity. And so when they painted a painting with the so-called pagan gods, they also felt that these represented deeply Christian truths. And I just also want to tell a story. I meant to tell it at the beginning. I wanted to tell you about how I came to start on this work with uh, Botticelli's Primavera and the Neoplatonic and magical properties and the medical properties of it. When I was 20 years old, when I was 19 actually, I transferred to Harvard to study art history. I had already studied Renaissance art in the South and in the North, and I wanted to study further. So on my first day at Harvard, I met a young man outside the Sanders Theater, for those of you who are familiar with Harvard. And this young man was named John Wolson, and he had just come back from studying at Emerson College in England, where he had done a Waldorf teacher training after a foundation year. And this man was to become my husband, now my former husband, and the father of my two older children, Laura and Seth. So that began my journey with anthroposophy. And in the spring semester, there was a visiting professor who was going to teach Renaissance art, and I wasn't allowed to take another course on Renaissance art because I needed to fulfill my distribution requirements and take ancient Chinese art. But I was so drawn to this visiting professor from the National Gallery in Washington that I audited his class on the Renaissance. And after his first lecture, where he spoke about the eurythmical line that was present in a painting he was describing, I realized I needed to study under this man whose name was Conrad Oberhuber. And I uh, went up to him after the lecture and I implored him to be my tutor. One had an individual tutor in one's field. And at first, he tried to put me off. He was very busy. He was married. He had 4 children. He was just a visiting professor at Harvard for this one semester. He was the curator of drawings at the National Gallery in Washington. Before that, he'd been the curator of drawings at the Albertina Gallery in Vienna. But to put me off, he asked me if I had read 2 books, Edgar Vinn's Pagan Mysteries of the Renaissance, and a book by John Sejnek, a French um, art historian who wrote about the pagan mysteries. And it just so happened that my husband-to-be, John Wilson, had given me those books for Christmas, and I had read them over the Christmas break. So I was able to say to Conrad Oberhuber, yes, I've read those books. Then he tested me further. He showed me a drawing from the School of Raphael that was in the Fogg Art Museum collection. And he asked me, can you point to the one face that was actually drawn by Raphael? And I looked at the drawing and I pointed to the one face I thought Raphael must have drawn. And Conrad Oberhuber became my tutor. And I studied the Neoplatonic mysteries and Botticelli with Conrad Oberhuber all spring. And we would do our tutorials walking along the Charles River. I don't know if you can imagine this young 20-year-old with his full professor um, walking in the spring breezes, the zephyrs that curled our hair as we walked along the Charles River and talked about these things that some consider to be boring erudite matters, but we were inflamed with passion for the knowledge that we were studying. Later on, I was to go back and do my PhD with Conrad, but I had my first child instead. And when I had my second child, Seth, I asked Conrad Oberhuber to be Seth's godfather. So he came down to where I was living in Spring Valley at that time and became Seth's godfather. And later on, he so wanted his own son, Lucas, to have a Waldorf high school education. His children were in the Waldorf school in Washington, that he sent his son, Lucas, to live with me in Spring Valley. And Lucas became ill while he was staying with me. And it was my first experience in a moment, seeing both the gesture and the countenance of an illness in Lucas, and I was able to diagnose him before I went to my medical training with a rather rare condition called Schönlein purpura, which I was able to find when I got the countenance of the illness in my Better Homes and Gardens family medical guide. And I was able to guide Lucas then into healing. So I did want to tell you that story because that laid the seed for me later to train as a physician myself and to be able to learn how to use remedies. So having gone on a little side journey, we're now going to start looking at the actual program. But I have one slide before that, which you maybe saw for a moment, which I included to show you what it was like to study art history at the esteemed Harvard University in the 1970s. This was a paper that I had written on Van Gogh that same year I was working with Conrad Oberhuber, and I was talking about how Vincent van Gogh tried to imbue his works of art with soul and spirit. And I can't see it on my screen, but I don't know if you can see, but the grading assistant circled soul and spirit, and in the margin he wrote jargon. So for me, soul and spirit were living and breathing realities. For those who were in charge of instructing me, they were jargon. And Conrad Ober, who had to go to the head of the fine arts department and explain to that person that my paper had not been well understood by the teaching assistant. And I just want to point out that this was a paper I typed on erasable bond, as one did in those days. One typed, and then one used a number 2 pencil to circle and write comments in the margins. So we have come a long way, whether for the good or for the bad. I bet Andrew would be better able to tell you. So the first part of Primavera is very much inspired by Ovid's metamorphoses that are shown in Ovid's Fasti and by a Neoplatonic poet, Poliziano, who was in those same circles with Botticelli and Ficino and Pico della Mirandola. And so a lot of the mythological figures were delineated in poetic images. And what we have here is these 3 figures who are in a metamorphosis in Ovid's and Poliziano's style. So one thing it's important to notice is that when we look at that painting, I'm not going to go back to the whole painting. I hope you have it in your mind. Rather than reading as we tend to do in the Western culture from left to right, in this painting, we have to move and go from the right to the left. So that, like the Hebrew script, already takes us into a mystery realm because we're reversing the direction that our mind is used to going. So we come in here from the right and we see the winged God, the blue zephyr, the wind of spring, who's flying in. You can see his wings just barely through the branches, and he's blowing that cool spring wind as he chases the bare earth nymph Chloris. And as Chloris is being captured or inspired by the force of the wind, you can see that out of her mouth, flowers start to pour, and she begins to metamorphose into the figure of Flora, who is the 3rd figure in this triad. So this is one of the first triads. It's called a proceeding triad because it starts in one place and it proceeds through metamorphosis into a new place where you have something that's 2 things that are opposite to one another, the blue cold wind and the bare earth nymph, and the meeting of these 2 then leads to a metamorphosis into a 3rd higher form, here a form of beauty. Let me just see. I have some details to show you of the blue wind god Zephyr capturing Chloris. And since we're in the anthroposophic circles, we can see that there's like the etheric transparent garments around the bare form, which follow as eurythmy veils do. I'm sure there are some eurythmists among us. And you can see how even though Chloris is looking back at Zephyr, her whole form is beginning to metamorphose into the form of Flora, who's the figure of spring herself. So one of the features of these triads, in addition to them being processing triads, is the Neoplatonic idea that there are 3 levels to coming down into incarnation and then returning to the transcendent one. And the names of those are ematio or emanation, raptio, rapture, or conversio, conversion, and then reamatio, where through something different having occurred in the raptio and the conversio, we reapproach to a higher plane. So in this triad, we are beginning to see the ematio, the emanation down into the flourishing, sensible world of beauty. Here's a detail of that figure of Flora. Here you can see that she's about to fling the blossoms of spring. She also has one of those transparent etheric garb. And you can see her feet with her threefold walking, just barely touching the ground, and the blossoming of the flowers under her feet. You can also see that evanescent veil of the figure of Chloris as she's metamorphosing into the figure of Flora. And each one of these flowers is a part that represents the whole. It was very important in Neoplatonic philosophy to see in each part the whole, and to see in the whole each individual part. And in this painting, there are anywhere from 170 to 500 species of individual plants. There are at least 130 that have been identified as species that we might know. You can see in the lower right the grape hyacinth, and there are also daisies and buttercups, cornflowers, poppies, violets. There are innumerable individual lovingly depicted plants through which one was able to enter in fully with imaginative vision into the part. So creation wasn't something that was cast away as is irrelevant. Creation was regarded as the script of God. And if we could understand that script and live lovingly into it, we could make our conversio and raptio and reamatio, our reapproach to the divine. This is just another detail of some of those beautiful species. And here you can see some iris. It's not the best slide, but I do love the iris. So then we move on from that first proceeding triad to the figure of Venus itself, who is the one who presides over this garden of love. This is a sort of a pagan version of the Hortus Conclusus, which I'll talk about more, the enclosed garden, where both Venus and the Mary, the Annunciate, hold sway. So after the triad, where we arrive at the figure of Venus herself, Plato believed that all communion between the gods and mortals was mediated by love, and this Venus Humanitas was the image of that love. Ficino called love the perpetual knot and link of the universe. And as he described that, Ficino said, beauty flows out of divine goodness and truth and radiates therefrom as light through the whole creation. Born of an act of love, the universe throughout reveals the beauty of the Creator. The triumph of Venus is the triumph of light. So that, I believe, is what Botticelli is showing in this Venus. This is not a voluptuous Venus. This is a restrained and harmonizing Venus whose hand gesture as it moves over to the three graces that we'll look at next is very reminiscent of the hand gestures of the Venus Annunciate. And I don't have that, but I believe I have another Venus and Child. This is done entirely by Botticelli, not by his school. And if you look at the hands of Mary and the Christ child, you can see that same gesture that Venus has of lifting and restraining. And you can see the close facial symmetry between Mary and the Venus in Primavera. So when the Neoplatonic school looked at figures of Venus, they also were seeing a figure of love, a figure of purity, and the figure of Mary. Now, if we move from Venus herself, we move to her attendants, the three graces. And this is where the conversio, the converting triad takes place, where what was spilled forth in that energetic triad of Zephyr, Chloris, Flora, and was then brought to a pause in the figure of Venus, now unfolds in this beautiful dance. Just give me a moment. So here again, we see that Platonic theology of God unfolding in a triad. And I will just go through the individual characters of the three graces. On the left, the grace is voluptas, who is the grace of passion. And you can see that she's stepping boldly towards the center. Her hair is flowing almost wildly towards the central figure. She has a large gem on her chest, and then her hand gently meets the figure of Castitas in the center, who I will come back to, and her other hand, it forms a knot with the figure on the right, the figure of Pulchritudo, who is the grace of beauty. And the grace of beauty has a much more composed arrangement of her hair. And you can see she has a more moderate size brooch. And her dignity is quite different from the impassioned gesture of voluptas. And in between these two, then, we have the figure of Castitas, who is being initiated into love by the two opposites, passion and beauty. And between this collision almost of passion and beauty, Chastitas is led into the world that will then take her through love back into the higher world through the mediation of the figure of Mercury that we will come to. And you can see that the gaze of Castitas is looking over to the side and it's looking straight at the figure of Mercury. I just wanted to show you this image with the gesture of Venus as she's sort of conducting and controlling the dance of the three graces so that it's extremely contained and interlaced, and then that knot of love and passion that is above the head of Chastitas. And finally, we get to the figure of Mercury, another wind god, like the god Zephyr, but now he's more the contained wind god, the god who stirs the clouds. And I'll show you a detail of that. The clouds being a kind of a way of veiling of the transcendent one from those of us who can't look on it directly. So Venus is the one who forms a transition for us and for Chastitas between the earthly world and the divine world. This is a detail of Mercury in this image holding his staff, and you can see up there he's just stirring the clouds. He's not breaking them up. He's just allowing the transcendent one a little bit of a way of breaking through the veils and being able to be reapproached. I just wanted to show you a detail of his beautiful red robe, and you may not be able to see it, but as the god also of death, death as love, a way of transitioning, into the other world. He has upside down flames of gold on his robe. So that emphasized the relationship of death and love in this transition from this world to the next. And then we have Blind Cupid. Just going to move along because I know we started a little late. Blind Cupid, who was in a certain way the supreme form of Neoplatonic love for Ficino, for Pico, for Giordano Bruno. For Pico, love is blind because it is above the intellect. So all of this maybe too intellectual explanation I've been trying to do, all of that is lost by being able to gather in a single moment of transcendent vision of the blind Cupid. We gather something in a single moment. And that goes back to the negative theology of Dionysus the Areopagite, where you arrive back at the one beyond all being by something that is blind and doesn't exist. So the intellect clarifies by setting limits, but to transcend those limits, we need something ecstatic that is supplied by the blindness of love. And this is also expressed in the epistles of Paul. Now I see through the glass darkly, but then face to face. And also, we see it in all of the great literature that we know. Shakespeare in Midsummer Night's Dream. Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind, and therefore winged Cupid painted blind. And also in Coleridge, his reason for love's blindness. I have heard reasons manifold why love must needs be blind, but this best of all I hold, his eyes are in his mind. So here we have the figure of the blind Cupid who lifts us above the intellect and has his eyes within the mind. And he has his arrow flaming and directed right toward Castitas, so that he will inflame the chaste grace into the passion that will then lead her via Mercury back up to the divine one. So I wanted to take you back to the whole image again, now that we've seen its parts, so that you can see this full octave flanked by the two wind gods, and then the unfolding of the first triad, the figure of Venus, who's a pause, the second triad, and then the returning to another wind god. I'm not good at singing, but this is the octave. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So we can both see and appreciate the harmony of the spheres as it is laid out in this image. And there was, in addition to the Neoplatonic theory of art, there was also at the same time a Neoplatonic um, music theory by Gregorius, who wrote a treatise, Practica Musica, where he talked about an 8-note schema which would lift us from this world into the next. And what he described was a central Apollo note. Here we have a central Venus note. And then on Venus's left, we have the three sensuous notes talked about by Gregorius, and on Venus's right, the three spiritual notes. And then the final note, the 8th note of Mercury, is the note that is supposed to take us back from the planetary music up to the music of the fixed stars. So all of these visual and musical images that were surrounding Botticelli were included in a very not theoretical and magical way in this image, which I am hoping I have shared with you. I am now going to move on to show you a few images that were done in similar style or that I believe are connected spiritually. I wanted to draw your attention to the unicorn tapestries. This is one of a series of unicorn tapestries that's in the Cloisters Museum in New York. They were woven in the Netherlands at the end of the 15th century, so contemporary with the Primavera. And I think you can see the same. It's called the Mille Fleurs, thousand blossoms or a thousand flowers, where this background of a thousand flowers, and then within it, an enclosed garden, a sacred space, and of course, the wild unicorn who was only able to be enclosed by being captured by the purity of the Virgin. And that, of course, for the Middle Ages and the Renaissance was the symbol of the willing incarnation of Christ to save us, that he was brought into the enclosure even of the Virgin's womb. That was the symbolism that was so present in the Middle Ages, where in the single part we could see the whole, and in the whole the part. And here it is the symbol of the incarnation. I'm just going to show you one other unicorn tapestry. This was done around the same time, and it's in Cluny. It's one of 6 tapestries, 5 of which are dedicated to showing the 5 most prominent or well-known senses. And again, you can see the Mille Fleurs background, the sacred Hortus Conclusus space that's set apart by the green carpet of flowers. And in this one, we see this sense of vision where the Virgin Mary holds up a mirror and she captures the wild unicorn by allowing him to see his reflection in the mirror. So, in the symbolism, we see too this role of seeing and mirroring something that is hidden and higher, which I will refer to later on. I also wanted to show you this painting by Stefan Lochner from the 15th century. It's in the same category of this Hortus Conclusus, picture of the Virgin that is supposed to lift us into the world beyond. This is a picture of the Virgin that's really like from Revelations, the Virgin who appears that's going to lead us into the higher world that's revealed in the chapters of Revelation. And you can see that in this painting, it's painted, there are painted red curtains that are being pulled aside and revealing against the gold heavenly background this heavenly figure of the Virgin with her child, and her robe, this heavenly blue, is actually made of individual points of blue, which I cannot show you in a slide. You have to see the painting. But in our mind, then, we put together all the countless little points of blue into the field of blue that is the Virgin's robe. It's really the first example of the pointillism that then would come into being in the 19th century with Seurat. But if you look at the Virgin Mary herself, around her neck is a brooch, and you can't see it. I couldn't get a detail that's good enough, but her brooch is one of the Virgin charming or capturing the unicorn. So there's a symbol within a symbol. Behind her are the rose bowers with both red and white roses, and her crown includes the highest stone on the way to heaven, which is a sapphire in which is reflected the entire universe. I can't get a good enough slide, but you'll just have to take my word for it that here again, the whole universe finds its reflection in this single lens or gem. And then above, you can see actually the Father God and the Holy Spirit streaming down towards that. I wanted to show you one other painting by Botticelli. This is a painting called The Mystic Nativity. And the event that happened between Botticelli's Primavera and this painting was that the Dominican prior Savonarola arrived in Florence. Savonarola was someone who was fighting against the outer lavish expressions of the popes who showered and coated everything with gold. He wanted to draw Christianity back into its deepest, inward, most mystic state. And the way he encouraged people to do that was through a bonfire of the vanities, the first bonfire of the vanities, which was held in the town square of Florence on February 7th, 1497. And in that bonfire, many people threw their works of art, including Botticelli, who burned a number of his paintings, and they threw in their makeup. So there was this rigid Dominican friar who was trying to return Christianity to its inward nature, but in doing so, um, threw into the fire all of that Hermetic tradition, which allowed people to use the beauty that showed in his Primavera to make an ascent in another way. But I wanted to show you this painting, which is the only painting Botticelli signed. It's signed up above, and which he dedicated to Savonarola. Um, the 12 angels at the top are the 12 angels that have the virtues of Savonarola. And here we see the triads unfolding in vertical space rather than in horizontal space. I'm just going to show you these angels and their ribbons streaming down with the thorn across the crown of thorns you can see dropping down from the heavens, and then a threefold group of angels now representing faith, hope, and charity. The red, green, and the white were the colors of faith, hope, and charity. And originally, the angels at the top were red, green, and white as well, but the green has degraded, as many greens do for chemical reasons. But you can see now we are able to actually see the gold of the heavens, which was left unseen in Botticelli's Primavera, just suggested by Mercury's staff stirring. Here we can actually see it. And there's the triad of the faith, hope, and charity angels. And then when we go down below, of course, there's the level with the Virgin Mary, the Christ child, and Joseph, all before the cave, which suggests the tomb of Christ. And finally, I'm just rushing a bit, but I wanted to show you also the figures at the bottom, which show the connection through love of the heavenly and the earthly beings. That if we can greet each other with the kind of grace that the angels here greet the humans, with the force of our hearts meeting one another with this tremendous dignity we see here, I think this gives us a visual image of something we can take with us into the world that we're living in today. And if you look between the two figures, you might be able to see the figure of a little demon that is actually shooting down into a crevice that's being conquered by this way of greeting one another in love that Botticelli was able to paint under the influence of Savonarola, but now in a very individual, mystic painting for contemplation by one person. Now I'm going to take quite a leap. This is a painting by Goya. And the reason I wanted to start showing you these images is because there are times when art needs to be a remedy, not just for the individual ailment or imbalance or rupture, but sometimes the world at large, society at large, undergoes such a violent rupture or disturbance that art then comes in and has a role to play in both revealing that rupture and in revealing it, allowing for a healing to take place. So I wanted to talk about art as a remedy, not just for the individual, but for the society at large when things are clearly amiss. This was a painting by Goya, painted in 1814. It's called The 3rd of May, 1808. And it is a painting of in protest, really, of the Napoleonic troops who occupied Madrid. And there was a resistance to the Napoleonic troops. And the Spanish resistance was then brought out and shot one by one by the Napoleonic troops in a truly inhumane way. So Goya's painting was to reveal to the world in a way that had never been done before in art the reality of a rupture in the societal fabric. Then later in Spain, we come to this painting by Picasso. In 1937, the painting of Guernica, which was also painted to try to bring to people's attention a great wound that is done to the social fabric. And this painting was done in response to the Nazi bombing of Guernica, which was a little village in the Basque country in northern Spain. Picasso read about it in the New York Times, and he painted this painting to draw to people's attention. You can see he painted it almost as if it is newsprint. And I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that there are echoes of Botticelli's Primavera in its structure. If you go to the right, again, you read this painting from right to left, and you have a sort of a caricature almost of the Zephyr figure blowing in, and and then an unfolding triad, and where the Venus Humanitas figure would be, you have this horse who's crying out in anguish. And then you go to the far side where the Mercury figure is this woman who's grieving over the loss of her son. So here again, art is being used to reveal rupture and illness in the body politic and give us a way to try to reapproach unity through being aware through art. And I'm going to show you one more work of art along those lines. And it's one I'm sure you're most likely not aware of. And it's going to require several slides for me to show this to you. This work is from the Carcel de Caseros. It was begun in 2006. It's an installation work done by a young artist, a man who had dropped out of Yale after his first semester. This young man had taken a very desiccated course in astronomy, which did not include the mystery of the stars that were included in the Primavera. And he gave up on his academic training in disgust and worked as kind of a wandering minstrel or troubadour for 3 years and found his way to South America. And when he's in Buenos Aires, he came upon this great concrete construction of a prison that was built to house what were called the desaparecidos, the disappeared. They built these concrete warehouses for the people who protested against the dictatorship in Argentina at that time. And by the time this young artist saw them, what he saw was these banks of windows at the side of the building. The windows weren't there to give light to the prisoners. The prisoners were kept in the dark and died. And outside the prison, the mothers were waiting for their sons who were incarcerated in this mountain of concrete. And what Seth saw was that in these banks of windows, he could bring back the he could reappear that disappeared. And I'll show you how he did this. And you can just picture these men who were incarcerated in these concrete warehouses who turned green from the lack of light. You know, a plant needs light to grow. The lack of light turns a human being green. So there were these banks of windows, and this young man, Seth, he could see that if he were to knock out some of those windows, the way the sun or the moon would fall on those banks of windows, faces would appear. And I don't know if you can see them, but in each of these 18 stories, he created 48 faces through knocking out some of the roundels so that the reflection of those disappeared would reappear. Here's a detail of some of those faces. I hope you can actually see the faces. They're very evanescent. And this is a picture of the artist on his ladder. He had to go through all the different layers of government, the city of Buenos Aires, the country of Argentina, the state, in order to be allowed to do this project. And he did it knowing that the entire prison was going to be torn down, deconstructed as soon as he finished his work. So he was reappearing something that was going to be disappeared. And you can see how he's X'd out the blue rondelles that he's going to knock out. And this is another picture. So this artist, Seth Wolfson, this young man, happens to be my son, Seth Wolfson, the son of that person I met on my first day at Harvard, who is the godson of Conrad Oberhuber, who was my mentor at Harvard and led me to understand how art could be healing. Conrad died of a glioblastoma multiforme when he was still quite young, but I wanted to bring the work that he inspired in me. And then, however, Seth got his inspiration, that he knew how to take reflections and image and light and transform them into something that would be ultimately healing and reconnect with something that had disappeared. I'm almost finished. In the same line in 2005, so a year before Seth started his work on Los Caseros, we had Banksy, who started painting paintings where no one expected them to appear. And this painting of Banksy's appeared on the wall that separated Israel from Palestine, that had been erected to separate the Palestinian people from their lands in Israel. So it was a painting of someone who, instead of throwing a bomb, is throwing a bouquet of flowers. So again, it's trying to draw attention to a great injury in the body politic through the use of art. And here you can see a detail of it where you would expect someone to be hurling a bomb. He's actually holding a bouquet of flowers. And these images just appeared on the wall. I'm going to go from there to another image of a bouquet of flowers to take you back to this world of flowers and healing. I don't want to leave you in the rupture. So this is a very well-known painting of Van Gogh. It's the painting among one of which I was working on when I wrote that paper where soul and spirit were referred to as jargon. Van Gogh wanted the very paint and color that he laid on thickly with a palette knife. He wanted the actual paint itself to be the healing quality. And he saw the sunflowers as being the earthly image of the godly light. And in addition, he painted this painting called La Berceuse, the nursemaid. And you can see he too goes back to that mille fleurs image in the background. And he wants these, for him, the bright colors of the red and the green are to be healing images. And he also included in the image the, the rope of a cradle, the cradle, which is in the physical space that you and I are in. So we are in the space of the cradle. And he wanted this image of the sunflowers and the nursemaid rocking to be like a modern altarpiece. This is an image from a letter that Vincent van Gogh wrote to his brother Theo, where you can see he sketched out the figure of La Berceuse between two of his sunflower images. So it was to be a modern day healing altarpiece that would lift us from the created world back up into a world that could heal us. And if you haven't read Van Gogh and Theo's letters to one another, it's a must read. And I will just read you uh, one part of it as we look at the whole together. So Van Gogh saw this as having soothing qualities in such a way that sailors who are at once children and martyrs, seeing in a cabin of then Icelandic fishing boat, would feel the old sense of being rocked come over them and remember their lullabies. So here I'm hoping that we can reapproach that healing of feeling of being rocked as if by a lullaby, and also return to the renewed garden, which is suggested in this painting by Rembrandt, where Mary sees is the first to see the resurrected Christ, and she takes him for a gardener. So we're taken back into a garden that's now been transformed. The garden where God placed Adam and Eve when he created them, we are now reamatio, going back through that garden. And the image of Christ as seen by as a gardener by Mary Magdalene, I think is one of the most healing images that's ever been painted. So I wanted you to have that image in this Easter season. And just to end with the image you might have seen at the beginning, which is one of my favorite paintings of healing. It's a painting from the 17th century by Georges de la Tour, and I've not actually seen this painting. It's a painting of Saint Sebastian being healed by Saint Irene. It's I came across it in the art museum in Fort Worth, Texas. I didn't see the painting. I just found a postcard of it and I loved it so much because it united both art and healing, which were the story of the two poles that I tried to merge in my own work. Um, the painting itself, it turns out, as I discovered when I put this presentation together, is in Detroit, Michigan. So you can see it in Detroit. And just so you know, Sebastian underwent two acts of martyrdom. I hadn't realized that, but he was martyred standing with arrows flung at him as if he were on a cross. And then he's taken down. And this scene unfolds where Saint Irene, who was another of the early third century martyrs in Rome, saints in Rome, um, removed the arrows and healed him so that he was then well enough to undergo his martyrdom by stoning. And then she too was martyred. But I think this image where the candle is in a lantern being held by another figure and casting its light upon the one who is healing and the one who is being healed is one that I would like to send you forth back into the world, hoping that by our inner activity, our acts of knowing on all levels, that we can both heal and be healed. So thank you all so much for your patience with me sharing tonight. And thank you again, Andrew.
What a pleasure to have you, Alice, here. Wonderful presentation, perfect for this season, the season of Raphael. And I will open this up to questions. And while you're, don't stop sharing completely
Yes,
because I
because
want you
people,
to
I
bring
can
up,
go back
yeah,
if
I
people.
want you to bring up the Primavera because I've got a couple questions for it.
Okay,
Um, but I thought I'd,
I have to do it this way. I'm not handy,
oh,
but I'll
terrible.
get to it.
Oh, that's awful. Good review.
Sorry. We're doing our nighttime, going
All
back.
right. Well,
There it is. Oops.
almost there.
Well, this one it will do.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. I have lots of thoughts and questions, and I'm glad you brought up Savonarola. Um, I did quite a bit of study on Leonardo da Vinci,
Yes.
and you couldn't possibly bring up all the characters of Florence at that time.
No.
There's one I'd like to mention who was not a Florentine, but came for the great council in Florence to try to heal the great schism of 1054. And so this was from the emperor, the Byzantine emperor, um, who sent Plethon, Georg Gemistus Plethon.
Yes.
Plethon did something to Ficino. I'm going to say he initiated Ficino. And Ficino then became the head of the Academia Platonica.
Ah,
And I strongly believe, but I have absolutely no proof, that Ficino subsequently initiated both Leonardo and Pico della Mirandola at this Academia Platonica. And
okay.
and then this, as you pointed out, Pico gets poisoned along with one of his other colleagues who are carrying on the mysticism that others felt had to be wiped out. And so
Yes.
they're poisoned. Um,
Let
so
me
I,
just mention here too that everything I talked about today was declared heretical by the Council of Trent. But
yeah,
I didn't know about the Council of Trent when I studied this.
absolutely. Um, so in this picture, when I was at Emerson College and William Mann, if you know that name, I
Yes.
don't know,
Yes.
talked about this. He wanted us to see around Venus this aura,
Yes, it's like a pupil of an eye.
right? Very interesting, so sort of from here out and all around her is
Yes.
this aura, and that Cupid is above it. And as
Yeah.
you pointed out, his arrow's about to strike chastity, or the Greek word, as you put it. And she is looking at, as you pointed out, Mercury, um, and he tried to explain that as a kind of this is what happens in life. So we have incarnation on our right and excarnation on the left. Just as you pointed out, this is the complete opposite, in a sense, of how we read and everything from left to right. But in Hebrew and perhaps other ancient languages that don't really exist anymore, it was right to left because everything in the etheric realm is the opposite of what it is in the physical realm.
Yes.
So thank you for all of that. Uh, but where was the question? Hmm. Do you know the painting Raphael does of Saint Sebastian?
Yes.
And I thought it was fascinating that Raphael has him holding an arrow, and all is fine. It's all okay that you shot me with these arrows. and that you left me for dead and that I was healed. It's all part of God's plan. Um,
Yes.
yeah, there's no like Grunewald, all the gruesomeness and so on of the passion.
Yeah.
He's not suffering or anything. It's just, it's all good.
There's also a beautiful Raphael painting, which I almost included, but I was trying to keep it, of a young woman who's holding a unicorn. It's also done around the same time, 1505, I think, where the unicorn is kind of like
Oh yes.
enclosed in her arm. It's a very
Yeah.
sweet
Yeah.
painting, early painting by Raphael.
Would have been a nice one for this. Okay, so lastly, let me end and turn it over to others. Um, I think it was William Mann also who named Zephyr as Numa and Chlora as Psyche and Flora as Soma.
They're pretty much the same. I mean, Zephyr, wind, pneuma, spirit, they're all the same.
Right.
That's what we have on both sides. And the earth nymph has a lot of different names. The name Chloris in Greek actually metamorphoses into the Latin name Flora. So they've all been given, all of the figures I told you about have been identified with different names depending on which program people looked at.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
decided not to do an analysis of all the different ways because I thought it would become too confusing. My paper on Botticelli had to look at all those different ways
Oh,
that
I'll bet. Yeah.
and why this version was turned out to be wrong and all of that. But I wanted to just um, give you a sense of the emanatio, the raptio, and then the riamatio.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Alice. Anybody else have any questions or thoughts or inspirations from this? And you can hit raise hand under the react or just unmute yourself and start yelling.
Yeah, hi, this is Tish. Thank you. It's a beautiful presentation. What was the name of the painting with Mary Magdalene and the resurrected Christ?
Mary Magdalene. All right, do you know which one she's talking about, Andrew?
I'm sorry, I was looking at the chat to see if there was a question for you, so I didn't hear it.
Might it be
Oh,
the Rembrandt?
oh yes, yes. That's I'll have to do a little flashing again, so close your eyes. I don't want to give anyone a seizure.
Yeah, it was Rembrandt. So,
Okay, that's at the end. That's the whole painting. It's not the best slide, but you can see the angels on the tomb and Mary Magdalene who's turning around. She sort of feels the Christ as the gardener from behind, and then her face is cast partly in light by the light that's on.
and what is the name of the painting? Do you know the name of the painting?
It's known as Christ appearing as the gardener. I
Huh.
mean, it's in London, I believe. It was Rembrandt painted a lot of his religious paintings privately. They didn't make money for him. But this isn't the painting actually has an arch to it at the top. This isn't the full painting. I did talk about it more in my Easter presentation, which
Yeah,
but you can see there the figure of.
yeah,
But it's
beautiful.
yeah, it's to me when it's one of his early paintings. It's in the 1930s, so it doesn't have the gravitas, so to say, as his later resurrection images. But to me, the image of Christ is the gardener. He's holding a little spade. He's wearing a sun hat. He's got sweat on his brow, and we're sort of drawn back into the actual stuff of gardening.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just glad you made it here. So, any other questions from anyone? I know it's well after 9, and but we got started very late. Sorry that it's
May I please ask the painter and the title of the painting? with the blue Madonna surrounded by these musical children?
It's called the Madonna of the Rose Bower. It's by Stefan Lochner, which is Lochner.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You're a Stefan too. Yeah, it's one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, I never saw that before. I'm amazed that you brought up this painting. It's just so beautiful, especially the children.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you look at the figures climbing the ladders in the background, it's really quite amazing. I won't make you go through the slides, but you can look at it again on your own.
All right. Well, Alice, there's the chat has all sorts of thank yous, and yes, there will be a recording. We are recording right now, and it will be processed overnight while I sleep, and I will post the recording tomorrow, both on our website and it will be in our YouTube channel. Now you're all going to ask, where is that? I don't know. So most of you know how to email me. So if you send me an email tomorrow, I will send you the link. So thank you so much, Alice.
Thank
I
you all
hope
for listening.
we get to have you again. 3 times is the charm. I'll get all the Zoom issues settled by then, right?
Yeah. Okay. Good to
Thank
see
you
you.
so much. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dick. Bye-bye, all.